Test cases are a very important aspect in every application. They help in cutting down the testing time and to detect any unwanted bugs which may pop up after any code change is made. It is even more important to select a testing workflow which is effective and convenient to use. One such workflow is using NUnit testing framework with Selenium WebDriver to test the user interface of any application. In this video, I will be guiding you all through the steps required to set everything up, and we will be using Visual Studio Code and C# language to set up unit tests for a very simple HTML page. So we will be testing this tiny little application with only one input field and one range validation implemented using JavaScript code. We will be creating several test cases to test this validation. So there is JavaScript code in place to implement a range validation for this field, and I'm just going to show you what it is. So what will happen is the minimum value of this field is 5 and the maximum value is 45 as evident from this code over here. We will be writing test cases for the min value, for the max value, and for the values which are outside of this range. So for example, if I will input 4, then the error message will print. If I will print 5 or anything between 5 and 45, then the message will not print. Anything bigger or smaller than that, the message will again show. So this is what we are going to test, and without any further delay, let's get started. So step number 1 is download and install Visual Studio Code if you still haven't done that. So Visual Studio Code, or in short VS Code, is a development environment which is provided by Microsoft. It is lightweight and it supports a number of different programming languages, and different kinds of applications can be built using this dev environment. So just download this one and you will be set up to create the applications which you want to create. Now to open up Visual Studio Code, all you need to do is copy the folder path and then open up command prompt. Now you need to navigate to the folder which you want to open in VS Code, and then type in the command code and then dot, press enter, and then Visual Studio Code will open up for you with the folder which we have selected. Now step number 2 is we need to install the NuGet package manager extension of VS Code. This extension is required because we will need to download the dependencies of Selenium WebDriver for our NUnit test project. You can do that by simply going to this extension tab and then typing the name of NuGet package manager in the search bar. I have already installed it. You can do that by simply selecting it. It will probably be on the top, and then you can install it by clicking on the install button. When you will install it, you can open up the package manager console by simply going to the command palette, and then there will be an option for adding a package which is looking like this one. Step number 3 is download the .NET Core SDK. You can download it by going through the Microsoft's download webpage, and you can simply first download the installer and then you can install it. The current version at the time of making this video which is available is .NET Core 3.0. You are going to need this SDK to create a new NUnit test project. We can use the SDK using console commands, which I will show you in a moment how we can do that in VS Code. Step number 4 is install and set up the C# Visual Studio Code extension. You can do that by searching for C# in the search bar and then select the topmost one and then install it. You may need to restart Visual Studio Code after installing it. So after you have downloaded and installed the .NET Core SDK from step 3, what you need to do is test if it has been installed or not by simply checking its version, and that can be done by first opening up the terminal from this terminal menu and then click on new terminal. By default you will see a PowerShell terminal. I have installed bash terminal. If you want to use git bash, then you can go to its URL, which is this one, and then you can download one for your operating system in which you are creating your application. There will be steps listed to set this up for your VS Code environment. Just follow them and you will be able to see the bash terminal inside your VS Code. So to test your .NET version, what you need to do is simply type .NET and then type version. So after you have installed .NET Core SDK version 3.0, its version will be listed over here. After we have tested that the .NET Core SDK has been successfully installed, we can go ahead and create a new NUnit test project using the command .NET new and then NUnit. This will create a new NUnit project for us. You can check the project files by going to the Explorer tab and then selecting the CSproj and the CS file which has been created for us. Now after installing, VS Code may ask us to add any missing dependency. We can click on yes to tell it to add them, and then it will simply restore those dependencies. Next up is building this NUnit project, and what we can do is we can simply type in the command .NET and then build in the terminal, press enter, and this will build this project. After we have built the project, there is an important step that we need to do, and that is to download the chrome driver.exe and then copying it into the bin folder, because we are going to use that chrome driver.exe to open up the Chrome browser and to put in the testing inputs into our sample web page. So Chrome driver for Windows can be downloaded from its website, which is this one, and I'm going to provide all of these links in the video description. Just download the Chrome driver which is matching with your current Chrome version, and you can click on these links to download it. My version is 78, so I have already downloaded that. And after you have downloaded the Chrome driver, what you can do is you can simply go to the bin folder and then go all the way into debug and then netcore app 3.0 folder and simply paste it in that folder like this one over here. For the next step, we need to install the VS Code .NET Core Test Explorer extension. So this extension is going to help us in listing all the tests which we are going to write in our NUnit test project, and then it will help us to run them either individually or all of them all together. It will show us the status of the tests which have passed or which have failed. We can also use this test explorer to debug the test cases. And there is one other setting which we need to do for this extension to work properly. So all of the tests are going to list in this tab, and for the tests to list over here, what we need to do is we need to go to the VS Code settings and then search for a setting which is called as test project path, and in this field we need to provide the name of our NUnit test project. So the name of our NUnit test project is this one. I'm just going to copy the file name, open up VS Code again and then simply paste it over here, and this is going to save the setting. Close the settings tab and then we can see all the tests in the test explorer. This is the sample test case which has been provided with the project which we created. Now let's just run this test once to see if our code is working initially. So this test has passed and you can see a green tick mark over here in the pane as well as in the code itself, which means that this test has passed. We can also fail this test by replacing this pass with fail, and then let's run it again. And now this time the test has failed. There is one more thing which you need to take care of. When you will create a new NUnit test project, then VS Code might download many different kinds of dependencies which it may need for this project to work. Just let the dependencies to be downloaded and for them to finish installing before proceeding to code your unit tests. The final step in setting up our unit testing project workflow is to install the Selenium dependencies from Visual Studio Code's NuGet package manager. For that purpose, I'm just going to open up the command palette by going to the view menu and then select this add package, which is the topmost option. Type in the name of the dependency which we need to install. In that case, I'm going to write Selenium, press enter, and now simply select selenium.webdriver. I'm going to select the latest version which is in the alpha stage, but it should work. Click on it and it will be installed. Just restore any dependencies which VS Code wants you to. The message when the Selenium dependency will be installed will be provided to us. So now it's time to actually test this tiny little web page which has a single field, and we are going to provide the test cases for this range validation. The first thing that we need to do is to provide the namespaces for the Selenium dependencies which we have downloaded. So open qa.selenium and let's also get the dependency for selenium.chrome because we are going to use the Chrome WebDriver. The first thing which I'm going to do over here is to create a field for the iWebDriver interface type, and let's just call it driver. Now we need three methods. The first method will be to set up the Chrome driver to open up the Chrome browser. The second method will be to actually test the validation, and the third method will be to close the Chrome browser and to wrap everything up. So we have the setup method, and I'm just going to use the attribute one time setup. Let's also add another method, and I'm going to call it close, and let's add the attribute which is going to be one time teardown. So one time teardown attribute will be for a method which is going to be called when all the tests have been run for this test class. And we also need to provide a attribute which is going to be test fixture. It will simply indicate that this is a test class, and our setup and close methods have been created. Now it's time to initialize the WebDriver, and this can be done by writing driver equals to new Chrome driver, and in the close I'm just going to close this WebDriver, and we may need to comment this out for now, for testing purpose. Okay, so now in the test I'm going to rename it, and let's just call it test age range. In this method, the first thing that we need to do is to provide a URL for our WebDriver, and this can be done by providing a value for driver.url, and this URL is going to be the URL of the web page which is going to be tested with this test case. The URL of the web page can be fetched by going through its folder and then copying the path. Let's get back to Visual Studio Code, copy it over here, and then provide its name, which is index.html, and we also need to provide the escaping backward slashes. The next thing that we are going to do is to fetch the references for the input field and for the container in which the validation message is being printed. So let's check the IDs of the input field and the container. This can be done by simply clicking on this arrow icon and then clicking on this text field. Let's just click on it, and the field which is selected with this selecting arrow will be highlighted in this elements tab, and the ID of this input field is txt_age, and similarly the ID of the container, which is a span, is validations. So we can create or we can fetch the references of these HTML elements, and then we can set some value in the text field, and we can also read the value which is inside this span. So to fetch the reference of the text field, all we need to do is create a new field of type iWebElement, and I'm just going to call it txt_age. It is actually convenient to use the same names which are in the HTML file. It will make it easier to track the fields which are being referenced into fields. So txt_age equals to driver.findElement, and then we can use the by class. So by.id, because we are going to fetch the reference by using the ID of the field. The ID is txt_age, and that's pretty much it. The next thing that we are going to do is to fetch the reference of the validations span. So I'm just going to name it validations, put the same name in the ID value, and now all we need to do is input a value in this txt_age field to trigger the validation. This can be done by simply calling the txt_age.sendKeys method, and what we can do is we can provide the value. So I'm just going to provide the value of 4 to see if the validation fails or not, and we also input a tab out from this txt_age field so that the validation can occur on the blur event, because in the JavaScript code the function which is actually validating the input is triggering on the blur event of this txt_age. So I'm going to copy this line of code from over here, and then all we need to do is to provide a tab out input, and that would be this backward slash and then t. Now what we can do is we can fetch the value which is supposed to be printed in the validations span by the JavaScript code if in case the validation fails. Otherwise nothing will be printed inside it. So what we can do is we can simply store it in a string value. So let's just call it validation text equals to this is validations. So validations dot get attribute, we can fetch the value which is inside or which is contained inside the span by using its attribute inner HTML, because the JavaScript code is using inner HTML to set the validation message, so we can use the same over here. So get attribute, and then we need to provide the value of the attribute, whose value which we need to fetch. So inner HTML, and that's pretty much it. And now let's check the value of this validation text. If this validation text is empty, or if the span does not contain any message, it simply means that the validation is successful. So what we can do is we can simply call assert.pass, and in the else block, if the span container has any value, it simply means that the validation has failed. So we can call assert.fail to fail this test. And now it's time to run and see if our test code is working or not. For that purpose, I'm simply going to open up the test pane and then select the test, or you know what, just click on this run all test button on the top. Let's just run it. The Chrome window has been opened. So you can see that the test code has inputted 4 in the txt age field, and the message is printed over here. That value should be between 5 and 45, and so obviously our test case is failing. Now let's see if our test case is passing or not by providing a suitable value. So I'm going to provide 5, which is the minimum value to pass the validation, and let's run the test case again. So this time no message has been printed because 5 is an acceptable value, but this is not a pretty good way to validate different values. So what we can do is we can use the test case attribute instead of this test attribute. So for that to work, first we need to provide an argument for this test age range method, and this is going to be an integer value. Let's call it age, and then we are going to use this age value to set inside the txt age input instead of a hardcode value. So age dot toString, because it is an integer and we need to provide a string value in this send keys method. So now we need to replace this test with a test case attribute, and now let's just provide some values for our test case. And the first value which I'm going to provide is 4, which is going to fail the test. Let's now provide 5, which is at the border of it passing. And then let's provide another value which should be, you know what, let's say 45, which is the maximum allowed value. The next value should be 46, and let's also provide another value which is, you know, pretty unrelated to everything, 999. And now let's just refresh this pane again, this unit test pane. So this time what has happened is the test explorer has added individual tests for each attribute that we have added. So when we will run this play, then it is going to run this method for all of these test cases. And now let's see which of the test cases are going to fail and which of them are going to pass. So let's click on play. Now let's get back to VS Code, and now it has failed 3 test cases, but it has passed 2 of them. So the test cases with values 4, 46 and 999 have failed, obviously because they lie outside of the acceptable range for this validation to pass, and 45 and 5 have passed, obviously because they lie within the range, which is the valid range. So this is how you can provide different test case values for your test method, and this is a very simple example. What you can do is for individual pages you can create individual classes, or you know what, for individual sections too you can create individual test classes with attributes of text fixture, and then you can create different methods for different fields. And there is one last thing which we need to do, and that is to close this Chrome driver, because if we will not do that, then the browser window will be it will remain opened. So let's just run the test cases again, and this time the browser window will close on its own after running all the test cases. So the browser window has closed, our test cases have run, we have the results, and that's how you can test your web pages using NUnit test project along with Selenium WebDriver in Visual Studio Code using the C# language. It's pretty fun, ain't it, right? You can also use Visual Studio for creating and working with NUnit test projects, but for some reason if you are not able to install and use Visual Studio development environment, then you always have the option to try out the free development environment, which is Visual Studio Code, which is also pretty powerful on its own. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I hope that you will like it and you will find it helpful for your projects. If you do, please don't forget to place a like on this video and also subscribe to this channel. This will make sure that you will be the first to know about any new video updates. And of course, if you have any questions or doubts, then feel free to use the comments area and I will try to answer to your questions with the best of my abilities. And till we meet in the next video, have a great day.